Welcome to Everything Life and Real Estate. Let's get started with our hosts, Linda McKissack and Dana Gentry.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Everything Life and Real Estate. I'm Linda McKissack.
And I'm Dana Gentry.
Hey, Dana, I am super excited today because you and I have an amazing guest on.
Yeah.
Actually, the guest is one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. I know we're always telling our tribe what we love listening to and who we love learning from. And so we have Geoff Woods with us today. And Geoff, I'm just going to let you kick it off. And you were born, and then what happened?
Yeah, sure. I was born, and then I read the one thing. No, there was a few things that there was a few things that happened in between now and then. So for people who we have not met yet, hi, I'm Geoff. I run the company behind the one thing. So I'm partners with Gary and Jay. And how that happened was a pretty interesting event. At the time in my life, I was in medical device sales, which was an awesome job. I got to run through hospitals. I sold a device that saved lives. I wore scrubs every day, tried to get my wife to call me McDreamy, all the good things. And I remember thinking one day where I'm really happy doing what I'm doing, but I'm not fulfilled. Which I think is something a lot of people can resonate with. They're happy, life's good, but ultimately they're lacking fulfillment. And knowing what I know now, I just didn't have enough pain in my life to compel me to make any changes. Yeah. So I went ahead and attracted those things into my world, starting with a colleague of mine. He had a stroke when he was 35. I remember my wife and I had just bought a house in Orange County, which, those real estate prices. My wife decided to become a stay-at-home mom because we just had our first child. I remember thinking, if what happened to my colleague had happened to me, what happens to my family?
Oh, wow.
Which was unsettling. And then the next week, my company decided they were going to cut my income by 40%. So you put those two things back to back and life gets a little hairy. And that set me on a journey to upgrade my five, to surround myself with five people who are where I wanted to be. And before you know it, it's our national sales meeting and Jay Papazan's on stage talking about the one thing. And I remember being blown away by the message and I going, how do I get this guy to be in my five? And then, of course, all the limiting beliefs set in, like he would never talk to you. You couldn't make it worth his time. Yet what I didn't realize was that he and Gary had a challenge because the one thing had become one of the highest rated business books of all time. And Gary's one thing was Keller Williams. Jay's one thing was writing books. They needed somebody whose one thing was the one thing. And it just so happened that I was the exact person they were looking for. And the rest is history.
Wow.
That's fantastic. I love it. Well, Geoff, I know you've done lots of episodes on your podcast, The One Thing. I've been fortunate enough to be a guest on it. I've heard many of your amazing guests that you have on it. What is some of the things as you work with people? I know you have a great course. I've taken that course before because I'm one of those people that I love when someone can take something so complicated and make it simple. Because I think as long as we're confused and there's gray areas, we don't take action. What has been some of the greatest lessons that you've learned working around the one thing and working around Jay and Gary? Because you work closer with them than a lot of people get to.
Yeah. So I'll tell you my 30, 60, 90, when I got hired, my first 30, 60, 90 days, I had to demonstrate that I could do three things to keep my job. First, I had to prove that I could cast a vision for the business. And the way they were going to assess that is if they were going to sign off on my GPS. Second, I had to create $100,000 out of thin air, literally just no product, just had to go make it rain. And the third is I had to prove that I could recruit talent. So we start with number one. And I remember I walked into Gary's little mastermind layer on the second floor, the 225 or 255, and sat down at the boardroom table with him and Jay, and I handed each of them a copy of my GPS. And Gary looked at it and started asking a bunch of questions about number one. And I remember answering them and saying, are we good? And he said, yeah. And so I started talking about number two. And then he went back and started asking more questions about number one. And I remember at the time not thinking anything of it, just going, oh, he must have forgotten. So I just answered the questions and said, we good, Gary? And he said, yeah. And I went on to number three. And he went back and asked more questions about number one. Now, I remember it was in that moment that you ever seen Meet the Parents?
Yeah.
You know the circle of trust.
Yeah.
It's very clear that I was not in the circle of trust. Why did he keep going back to number one? And I look over at Jay for a lifeline and he's just giggling like a little schoolgirl, but he's not throwing me the lifeline. I just remember answering the questions the best I could. I said, we good, Gary? And he said, yeah. And so I went back to number three. And after about 10 seconds, he stopped me and he asked, Geoff, do you need to do number 3 in order to do number 2?
Mm.
I said, no. He said, do you need to do number 2 in order to do number 1? I said, no. He said, then do me a favor, draw a line between number 1 and number 2. Or even better, rip the page in half. And he literally waited while I took my GPS and ripped it in half. And then he said something that's just kind of been seared in my mind ever since, which is, don't even think about number 2 or number 3 until you've earned the right to by mastering number 1.
Wow.
That's amazing. I always say the secret sauce with Gary that even those of us that have been with him for 20 something years don't really get to see is that beauty of how he can get the best out of the best people, probably more so than anyone else. What did you learn from him doing that with that GPS? I mean, had you ever worked with and done a GPS? By the way, for those that don't know what a GPS is, we'll put one down in the show notes as a link so you can kind of get an idea of what a GPS is, because we do have listeners that are not with that are with all companies.
Yeah, it's a one-page business plan. So it's a very simple framework for taking a big goal and breaking it down into simple priorities and strategies to accomplish it all on one page. I had not prior to starting this company. So that was my first intro into it. And I had run it by Jay a few times, and I understood I was going down the right path, but it became abundantly clear to me in that moment that my entire career, I violated the number 1 law of productivity or fell trapped to it. I woke up and said, these are all the things that have to happen this year. And I divided my focus, trying to move the ball on number 1, then moving the ball on number 2, and moving the ball on number 3. And here's Gary saying, until your number 1 priority is done, everything else is a distraction.
Yeah. Well, you probably, if you would have really thought about it, would have thought less of him if he'd have let you put 5 things on there, or 4 things, or 3 things on there. It is the one thing, right?
Yeah. It made so much sense, but it was the first time. It really felt like my entire life I'd been living in black and white and not realizing it. And that moment, that day, I felt like I was seeing in color for the first time, because that day I truly saw my one thing and I saw everything else as a distraction.
Wow.
Amazing. What do you see is the biggest thing that when you work with people and you try to get them clear on the one thing and to understand the importance and work on the one thing, what is the main reasons you think people struggle around this concept?
Sure. Well, first is they hear one thing and it's a provocative idea that they can't wrap their head around. And they say, I have more than one thing, so that won't work for me.
Yeah.
And what they don't understand is that it's not, we all have more than one thing, folks. And instead of looking at everything that's on your plate, like a bunch of stuff that's on your plate, start viewing them as dominoes. The question is, instead of viewing them as dominoes that are standing up and having to go and knock down each one individually, the question is, how do we become the type of people who line them up, identify the lead one, and whack away at that one first?
Yeah. Geoff, I had a quick question. So I taught the business planning clinic yesterday. Linda's getting ready to teach it in Dayton. I'm teaching it again next week in Lexington. And one of the things that came up a couple of times yesterday was the idea of the goal setting retreats for agents and for teams and such. And I was just wondering if you could touch on that for a minute and maybe share like some successful ones that you've seen, or just anything that you could offer around goal setting retreats.
Yeah, sure. So we host a flagship event every year, which is a couples goal setting retreat, which even though it's branded as a couples retreat, about half the room, but the other half is individuals and then team members. The pitfall we see people fall into when they set goals is they set them looking forward. They ask the question, what do I want to achieve this year? They make their list and they try to put it in order of priority and figure out how they're going to get it done. The challenge with that is you don't know a priority from a distraction. And here's what I mean by this. If we asked you to think back over your life as to how you got here to this very moment, you might think, well, I just clicked play on this episode. And before that, I woke up. And before that, I got into real estate. And before that, I was doing this. And before that, I was a kid in this city. When you imagine your life looking backwards, you imagine it as a straight line. Yet when we look forward, we don't see a straight line. We see all these things that we can do over the course of a year. Yet if you imagined that we all came together when we were flying from where you are across the world to your favorite country, if that plane was 10 degrees off course and it did not correct, would you end up arriving where you wanted to arrive?
No, absolutely not.
No way. You could end up in a massively different future.
Yeah.
And that's what happens with us when we set our goals looking forward. What might seem like an attractive, shiny object this year, over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years could be a massive deviation from what you actually want out of life. And if you want to set goals the way that billionaires set goals, you have to time travel. And this is what we facilitate and suggest to other people. It starts by going out someday. You get to decide what that means. 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. And ask, what does an extraordinary look like someday from now? Let's pause real quick and acknowledge. Do you think that question's an easy one to answer?
No.
No, it's not.
Idea.
Most people hit a big, tall brick wall labeled, I don't know.
Yep.
And they stop searching. Not you. Not you. This is part of getting out of your environment, going to a retreat where you can have an experience facilitated so you can search for those answers and get a direction of what someday looks like. It's not absolute clarity. It's a direction. But once you've got that someday direction, you can imagine looking back on your life and asking, where would I have to be 5 years from now to be on track for my someday? That's still a little challenging, and you can get it done. Once you have that 5-year vision, you can then look backwards and go, great, well, where would I have to be by the end of this year to be on track for the 5? That's easy. People know that one. Once you know your 1-year goals, great. You've done your goal setting retreat. Now it's how are you going to get it done? And that's when you weave in the tools like a 1-page business plan, a GPS, so that you have alignment across your org. And then you use a tool called a 411 that gives you personally clarity on your priorities for the year. And based on that, what you got to focus on this month. And based on that, what you have to focus on this week.
Yeah.
Awesome. So true. I find that it really, and even for myself, someone who loves to achieve at the highest level, sometimes using those forms, the 411 and the GPS, those are really hard to stick with long term. Why do you think that is? Why do people struggle with a tool that would let you know if you're off track? And I always like to say, if we don't really have a plan around it, we don't know what's working or not working.
Correct.
So what do you think? Why do people struggle with that?
It's the overall struggle with the one thing. They think big and act big, rather than thinking big and going small. Here's what I mean by that. They think big. Like, I'm going to be the type of person who every week fills out my 411. So I'm accountable and I'm clear. And I'm going to act big by trying to have a perfect 411 and trying to ensure that I time block everything and that I honor my time blocks perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
When they set that as the measure of success, every single day they feel like a failure.
Sounds like my diet.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. and what we know is that we will only allow ourselves to feel like a failure for so long before we give up. And the opportunity is to think big about being that type of person and start by going really small. And I'll share this. This was my first 66-day challenge. My favorite quote from the one thing is from F.M. Alexander. People do not decide their futures. They decide their habits. Their habits decide their futures. And we know it takes on average 66 days to form a habit. So I said, all right, I'm going to go on a 66-day challenge where every day I'm going to do one thing. And when I do it, I'm going to put a big red X on this calendar that's got 66 days on it so it can become a habit. And that one thing, I wanted to form the habit of thinking in order of priority. The one thing I could do to think in order of priority, I'm about to model what it means to go small, is to do a 411. And the one thing I could do that would make doing a 411 easier or unnecessary, I whittled it all the way down, ladies, to could I check my 411 before I checked my email? Could I just look at the piece of paper before I looked at my inbox? Could I check my priorities before I checked everyone else's?
That is so good.
Yeah, that's what I mean by going small. A 2-inch domino that is so small that with the flick of a finger it falls. And if it's just that domino alone, it doesn't change your life. But because the dominoes are lined up, because we goal set to the now, you unleash a domino effect in your life. That's the thing. People don't do it because they're going too big versus saying, can I start with something small? Like, let me just form the habit of looking at it. And if I look at it and it's empty, what am I more likely to do? Fill it out. And if it's filled with stuff and I'm checking it, am I more or less likely to do the stuff?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And if you start doing your priorities, are you more or less likely to actually get results?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I notice when I have people fill out the 411, they always make the same mistake. They actually fill out every single week at the beginning of the month. Why do people do that? Instead of saying, well, I can't fill out every week because I don't know what's going to have been left over this week.
You want my hypothesis?
Yeah.
Because it's a blank space. So they fill it in. It's why we read for the 411 template that we teach in the one thing, we don't have the 4 weeks on it anymore. There's just a weekly section that you have to completely erase and start over every week. Or the other mistake they make with that template that has all 4 weeks at the bottom is if they don't get something done in week 1, they automatically move it to week 2 without questioning if it was a priority to begin with.
Oh, that's good. And I've been guilty of that before. Yeah. Wow.
I would say the greatest. Go ahead, Dana.
I was just going to say before at some point on this podcast, I want to make sure that we talk about our planners, because I think we would be remiss to not talk about the planners. And Geoff, I know I emailed you and thank you for responding, because I've been like internally freaking out because I'm already planning 2020, but I don't have my 2021 thing calendar yet. So I'm like, but I would like to know, how did y'all kind of come up with that? And just talk a little bit about the planner, because we are obsessed with ours. And
Sure. So Gary Keller says, if you want to achieve big things, you need a bigger view of time. And when we look at the digital calendar, it does not give us a big view of time. Most of us are looking either at that day, which you can't even see the whole day. You're just seeing a snippet of the day, or you're seeing the week. Yet if you want to get a monthly view and you go and you click on that monthly icon, there's no way you can see all the stuff that's on there. It's just a sea of appointments.
Yep.
And if we ask why this is, it's because the digital calendar was not designed to help reflect your priorities. It was designed to track meetings with other people.
That's so true.
So for Gary, for the CEO of a tech company, he actually doesn't use a digital calendar. He only uses a paper planner.
Yeah, I still use his 30-day at a glance. Yep. And I had someone kind of ridicule me on an airplane one day, and I said, look, the guy I know that taught me this system is a billionaire. So until I pass his income, I'm not changing my planner.
Yeah, because most people, when they hear the idea of a paper planner, they struggle and they go, well, where am I going to put all this stuff? And it's going, no, that's the number one lie. Everything doesn't matter equally. If you want a place to track everything, Microsoft and Google do an amazing job. Yet if you want to actually have a relationship with your goals and understand and have visibility quickly into the things that matter most, you need to have something that's designed for it. So we looked at how Gary uses his planner, and we sat down with people in his world. We sat down with you, Linda, and you looked at the mock and said, hey, I would love if there was a place for me to write down what my one thing was every day and if I got it done or not. So we put that in there.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah. My favorite thing about it, honestly, is the reflect and plan questions after each month, because I don't know if surely to goodness, I'm not the only person that feels like this, but even today I'm like, I cannot believe it is October. Where does every single month go? And we so quickly fly past 1 month and we're into the next and we're into the next. And we don't ever, or at least I never took time to stop and reflect back on the month. And now, honestly, because of this planner, one of my very favorite things to do is answer these questions at the end of the month. And it really makes you think about moving forward to the next month when you do that.
Yes. And this is very common for achievers. We are so future paced that we do not stop and look back at the body of evidence that is our last week or our last month and ask questions like, what's one thing we could do differently this month that would make everything else easier or unnecessary?
Right.
You know, what were the things that went well this last month? What are the things we could have done better? Based on that, what can we do differently this month? What's most likely to stop us? What's a solution for that? I mean, these are just basic coaching questions that we weave into a rhythm called a reflect and plan.
Yeah, that's awesome. Geoff, we gave, you were so kind to come to a dinner we had with guests in Austin this past year, and we gave each of them one of your one things. And I have to tell you, was it not, Dana, their highlight of everything that they did in the few days they were there?
I mean, we had guests. Yes, we had guests that out of the entire event, like the dinner with you was their favorite part.
I love what you said, Geoff. Relationship. It lets you have a relationship with your goals, and that feels and sounds so much more intimate. What I'd love to do, and Dana, we could do this. Let's have a contest. We'll get as soon as Geoff gets those planners out. Hurry up, Geoff.
Yeah.
We'll give away one of our listeners one of Geoff's planners if they will go to our Instagram page at #EverythingLifeInRealEstate and give us an idea of a question, a challenge, or a topic that they'd love to hear on the podcast, and we'll do a drawing. So, Dana, we can do that, right?
Yes, we can do that. We'll post it today. I'll post it today. That would be awesome.
Cool.
Awesome. So good. So, Geoff, I always love the fact, and one of the reasons I get certified every time you have a certification for teaching the one thing is because, I believe mastering something, teaching it's the best way to do it. And then I also love, I say this a lot, but once you know something, you can't pretend you don't. I think Oprah or somebody said it originally. And so you've been teaching this stuff a long time. What have been some of the greatest blessings that you've gotten from having to live this every day? You went from, meeting Jay to now this is your life. What have been some of the greatest blessings that have happened for you because of that?
Yeah.
Good question.
I start to tear up even thinking about it. It's really a great example of a halo effect. How when you do one thing in a certain area, it can start to shine down in others. Let's go back to that quote from F.M. Alexander. People don't decide their futures. They decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures. Now, I remember hearing Gary say that if you want to live an extraordinary life, you got to master something. And it really only has to be one thing, but you got to go on a path of mastery. And I remember sitting, looking at him and asking, what did Gary Keller master that made Gary Keller Gary Keller? And one of the things that came to my mind was he's mastered this ability to attract amazing talent into his world and keep them. Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, well, that's thinking big. Now what's the going small version of that? I asked, well, what's the one thing you could do to recruit and retain the most amazing talent? You'd have to be able to coach them to their possibilities so they have everything they want inside your world. Okay, well, let's go smaller. What's the one thing you did for that? Well, you'd have to know how to ask them these profoundly productive questions. Okay, well, what's the one thing he could do for that? He'd have to know what a productive question is. Well, what's the one thing he could do for that? You'd have to start asking questions. And I whittled it all the way down to this lead domino. It was so small, it felt like it was cheating. Could I ask one question a day when I naturally would have told?
Oh.
As a leader, we have a tendency to give people the answer because it's faster.
We talk about that all the time, Geoff.
And I went on a 6-day challenge. Once a day, could I ask a question when I naturally would have told? And here's what happened that was interesting that answers your question. One day I was at my home and my daughter was about 5 years old at the time. And she is so driven, yet so stubborn. And if it is not her idea, she is not on board. And one thing she's never on board with was going to bed because she's a social little butterfly. And I remember one night I was about to snap and I was about to lose it. And instead of screaming, Daphne, go to bed, this ease came over my body. And I remember thinking, and then I asked, Daphne, how are you feeling right now? And in my mind, I was like, got my ex on my calendar. She looked at me and she said, tired? I went, well, honey, what's one thing you could do so you won't be tired anymore? She said,
I love it.
She said, I could go to bed. And I went, honey, what a great idea. And she went, okay, daddy. And she marched straight upstairs and put herself to bed. And I literally looked at my wife and went, you've got to be kidding me.
Oh, so good.
That's good.
You fast forward, a year has gone by. My daughter talks about how she wants to go on a 65-day challenge. If she will say, Daddy, that's not my one thing, that's a distraction. She knows the language. So to be able to be a practice leader has not only helped change the lives of professionals and people who listen to the podcast, but to see it rub off on a 6-year-old brings me to tears regularly.
That's cool. That is super cool.
Yeah.
So I have one more question, and I totally out of curiosity, what's been your favorite episode from y'all's podcast? Because I know what mine is. and I'm trying to know what yours is.
Yeah, there's a top two. One is around episode, I think 150 is Susan Scott, Fierce Conversations. That's a must do. And another is Keith Cunningham, The Habit That Cost $100 million to Learn and Why It Was Worth It.
Oh, you know what? I've actually not listened to that one. I have to go back.
Yeah. So yes. Yeah. Keith literally, if you've read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he's Rich Dad in real life. He's friends with Gary, and he literally lost $100 million at one point in his life. And out of that formed one habit, and it made it way worth it.
Wow. Now I'm getting ready to be on a 3-hour car drive. So that'll be what I'll be listening to on the way back. When Rachel Hollis was, I mean, hands down, I think has been my favorite yet.
That's awesome.
Yeah, yesterday she spoke for us yesterday. I'm at a Brandon Bouchard influencer conference right now, and I have to tell you, oh my gosh, we've had some amazing speakers. She was genuinely, truly the best.
Yeah, she's
so raw and authentic. I loved one thing somebody said to her was, she said it really drives her crazy when somebody comes up to her and says, "Oh my gosh, isn't it awesome that your first book did so well?"
She talked about that on the podcast. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah,
so good.
That's awesome. That's super cool. Love it. Linda, did you have any more questions? I know we're about out of time.
So, Geoff, what would be one thing that we should have asked you that we didn't?
Ooh.
That is a good question. I think it would be the single biggest mistake that people make, living the one thing.
Good one.
And when we've hit it, and it's worth hitting again. They think big and act big. They don't think big and go small. I'll give you an example. They read the book and they hear about time blocking, scheduling time with yourself to do your most important priorities. And then the book, Gary says, block half your day, block 4 hours for your one thing. They see that and they make that the mark of success. I've got to do 4 hours. I'm going to do 4 hours for my one thing. That's awesome. And what happens is on day one, they do an hour and they feel like a failure. Day two, they do 2 hours, 100% improvement, and they feel like a failure. And over time, they just give up. They do not trust the domino effect. They don't trust that if they line the dominoes up and just make the mark of success, knocking that 2-inch little bad boy at the front, that's the win. Because that domino alone does not create extraordinary results. It's when the domino knocks down the next, which knocks down the next, which knocks down the next. And we have to understand in our lives, if we want to achieve extraordinary results, it comes over time, not instantly. So the path to getting everything you want is to get one thing at a time. You must think big. You have to go small, and you have to trust that the dominoes will fall.
That's awesome.
That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, Geoff, we really, really appreciate your time. We know how valuable it is, and we certainly appreciate you sharing with our audience. We talk about the things that we love, and your podcast is right up there at the top. So thank you so much. And I want you to remember, if you have any questions, submit it to info@lindamckissick.com or reach out to us on Instagram at #everythinglifeandrealestate. And remember, if you'll answer this question today on Instagram, what would you like for us to talk about? What are some of your challenges or opportunities that you'd love Dana and I to help you with, or just some topics you'd love for us to cover? We'll give one lucky winner one of Geoff's amazing planners from The One Thing. And be sure and just let us know, what you want. What do you want to hear? And if you'd like to be a guest on our podcast and have Dana and I help you with a problem, a situation, opportunity, or maybe just a challenge you're faced with, submit your name and as much info about you and your business as you can to info@lindamckissick.com with a brief description of what you would like to talk out with us. And again, remember, the more information you give us, the more we're going to be able to help you.
And we'd love to have you guys check out your next couples retreat or one thing retreat. So Geoff, what do you guys have coming up, and how can somebody find you and get information?
Thank you. It starts by going to our website, theonething.com, and that's with the number 1 in the URL. The podcast and the book are all spelled out the ONE thing, but the website's with the number 1. If you click on training, and you'll see an events section there, you can learn more about the couples retreat. If you can't, that is coming right up. And if you cannot attend the one that we're hosting in Austin, we've got a master course that it'll facilitate it for you anywhere around the world. You'll learn all about there. The podcast is there. Everything is there.
Awesome.
Perfect. Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks, guys, for joining us today. And Dana, I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Geoff. See you next week.
Geoff.
Bye.
Be sure to subscribe for more business strategies and tactics to inspire you to live an abundant real estate life. Don't forget to rate and review so we can bring you the best content. Find this and other valuable information at everythinglifeandrealestate.com.